Buenas tardes a todos. Iniciamos nuestra segunda jornada. Cedo la palabra al doctor Pietro Montanari.
Sí, gracias a Alejandro. Pasamos a introducir nuestros invitados de hoy y Omar Salas, te cedo la palabra inmediatamente. Gracias.
Sí, gracias a todos, bienvenidos. Tenemos entonces una sesión con tres participantes, el primero de los cuales es Gabriele Cornelli, que es profesor asociado de Filosofía Antigua en el Departamento de Filosofía en la Universidad de Brasilia, que fue presidente de la International Plato Society del 2013 al 2016 y es director de Arjai UNESCO, la cátedra Arjai UNESCO, acerca de los orígenes plurales del pensamiento occidental. También es editor de la revista Arjai, de la revista Atlantis y del Plato Journal. Actualmente es editor de 4 series de monografías: Brill's Plato Studies, en Brill, naturalmente, Arjai en Ana Blume de Sao Paulo, Cátedra en Paulus, Sao Paulo, y Filosofía e Tradição de UNESCO Brasil. Pues un gran amigo y un gran exponente de los estudios de filosofía antigua. Te damos la bienvenida, Gabriel.
Gracias, Omar. Gracias. Voy a cambiar para el inglés, si está bien, para todos. ¿Sí?
Sí, sí.
So I must be very grateful to my colleague and friend Pietro Montanari for this exciting invitation. I would be very happy to be there with you in person, of course, because I love Mexico and all Latin America. We are in a bad trouble, I would say, recently here in Brazil. So we had the worst election we could imagine yesterday, and we are hoping for the best in the next 28 days. So let's start immediately, because I don't want to take too much time from your attention. So I have been recently in the Amazon jungle. And while I was finding my way through the rainforest, I happened to remember Barker's note in the incipit of his very good paper on the Philologous, published a few years ago in the Aperon journal. Philologous 1617a is generally reckoned to be one of the most impenetrable parts of the Platonic jungle. This is Barker saying. From time to time, intrepid investigators load their backpacks with the very latest in philological and hermeneutic equipment, together with selected remnants of the scholarly gadgetry of earlier generation, and set off to explore it. Many return bubbling in unfathomable tongues. I will try to follow Barker's advice on how to travel as well as his own hope. Barker was saying, I shall be traveling light. It remains to be seen whether I survive the trip. Said so, I don't believe, as many did, and still do, I might say, that Philologous must be regarded as a complex dialogue, not to say strange. I would like to refer to a very good paper from my friend Muniz and Radenbush. They were very successful in proving that the word games and the internal reminiscences in the dialogue seem actually to point to a very well executed piece of art. Of course, this, at least I'm ready to concede, it's a fairly complex piece of art. Already Grote, in 19th century, bitterly complained about this complexity. Plato's attempts to discuss ontology and ethics, these are Grote's very words, in one and the same piece of reasoning, instead of elucidating both, only serve to darken both. On the contrary, I believe that this way of doing philosophy is probably the most Platonic one can find. Plato always combines methodological references with metaphysical statements and ethical assessments. If ever dialogue has sought to intervene ethics and metaphysics, methodology and philosophy, human and divine, this is exactly the Philebus. Anyway, we can all agree that Philebus is absolutely central to the reconstruction of Platonic thought itself and its supposed development, in the sense that it represents, so to speak, Plato's last word that came directly to us about the dialectic which constitutes the very essence of his philosophy. I hope I persuaded you that this hiking through the forest is definitely worth a try. If I may, I would like to be allowed to press on a little bit to the point that it could be possible to argue for a quite relevant place for the Philebus in the entire history of ancient philosophy. Philebus is certainly one of the most important works of the whole ancient philosophy, not only for the contribution it offers to the understanding of Plato's thought, but also for the continuity it allows to establish with pre-Platonic and post-Platonic thought. And this is, of course, my point. On this route of continuity, since quite a long time right now, almost 2 decades, I am myself trying to comprehend possible methodological paths which allow to think about the relationship between Pythagoreanism and Platonism. Plato and Pythagorean philosophy constitutes, in fact, a central pivot for any historiographical attempt of ancient philosophy. So what I intend to do here is to develop another piece of this historical methodological puzzle of the sources of Plato's thought. The inspiration for this talk came directly from Damascius of Damascus, the last diadochos of the school of Athens. In a note, he spoke of what is derived from the limited and the unlimited, as Plato says in the Philebus and Philologous in the books of nature. This is a quotation from the Principis. So the Philebus and the Pythagorean Philologous in the books on limited and unlimited. This is the suggestion that I received, and I want to go through within the Platonic text. So this is the dialogue between Plato and Philologous I mentioned in my title. One last introductory remark, if I may. I believe all the efforts in order to see to what extent Plato Pythagorizes, quoting here the famous adage from Eusebius of Caesarea, makes all sense also, or maybe makes all sense especially here in the Philebus. We are at the very core of Plato's philosophy here. As Burnett has said, Philebus' subject matter, the application of Pythagorean categories to problems of conduct, is precisely that which Plato represents as having always been Socrates' chief interest. So we are really at the core here. Philebus' dialogue starts right in the middle of an ongoing debate. Socrates is disputing if pleasure or intelligence are the good. You all remember that. It is agreed from the beginning that Protarchus, on behalf of the fairly uncooperative Philebus, will be in charge of defending the claim of pleasure. Then Socrates will be making the case for intelligence. But the debate moves almost immediately into a general discussion on one and many, followed by a lengthy digression on dialectics and its method. The first of the passages framing the constitution of things in terms of limit and unlimited. I consider the Philebus first pages extremely significant, mostly because they make you glimpse Plato's ontology in its formative moment. We can see here at play the epistemology of the dialectics as a method and as a corollary of an inherent ontology. But I will dedicate my paper to the third section of the dialogue, pages 16c to 23c. These pages will reveal that Aristotle, in the end, was right to highlight the influence Pythagorean theories had on Plato. These pages show the extent to which Plato regarded his effort to understand the first principle as a continuation of Pythagoreanism, as Aristotle also later pointed out in that famous page of Metaphysics Alpha 987b, a critical crossroad for both pre-Socratics and Plato studies. At the same time, the Pythagorean tradition, which I will argue today, Plato preserves with some accuracy, is a starting point for his own theoretical projects of force, especially his search for a solution to the problem of the unity and multiplicity of existing things. What I'm trying to do here is a kind of an archaeology of this specific Platonic problem, a problem developed in these Philologous pages in a fairly original fashion, showing both ontological and epistemological features. I hope it will be possible to conclude not only that we can find general traces of Pythagorean tradition laying behind Plato's text, but maybe something more precise. First, that these traces correspond to specific texts of a specific Pythagorean philosophers. And two, that efforts to Platonize Pythagoreanism are not simply academic trends. Of course, they're also academic trends, but rather can be traced back to Plato himself. No doubt that the Pythagorean background of the onto-epistemology of the Philologous has been discussed widely, and wildly, I must say, by many scholars. We have classic works like the ones by Gosling and Serre, but I think it's Burkert who first discussed the importance of page 16c of the Philologous for our understanding of the relationship between Pythagoreans and Platonism. And Hofmann, of course, followed his lead, arguing very persuasively that the central feature of Plato's description of the method of the man of old at Philologous bears a striking resemblance to what is found in the fragments of Philologous. These Philologous pages introduce the subject of the dialectics of limited and unlimited. Here, the search for the bigger question of pleasure is developed in terms of the theme of unity and multiplicity, of the one and the many, a concern which was shared by many pre-Socratic philosophers. The dramatic character of this theme is underlined by the prologue of this section. I quote, there couldn't be a more beautiful way, that is, which I always loved, but that often ran away and left me alone with no way out. Socrates says, we are here at the genuine heart of Plato's dialectic, waving the backbone of his ontology and epistemology. Socrates, in a kind of methodological drama here, emerges as someone in love with this beautiful path, hence repeatedly abandoned in the middle of the road, no way forward. No surprise, of course, that the solution to the question comes from afar, both in a physical sense and in a temporal sense. It is presented as a revelation, as a gift from the gods, dos in theon, in 16c, and then as the discovery of the ancients, oiprothen, in 17d. This is the discovery of the simultaneity of limited, unlimited in things that are, and the harmonia between the two as a principle of the metaphysical functioning, I would say, of reality. And this is the text number 1 in the handout. I will not read the text. It is primarily about the gift of epistemological significance, as immediately after it is said to consider, in the way the gods point to us that one must learn and teach each other. Who is this Prometheus? What can be said about these ancients that sent us the revelation? And why limited and unlimited are so crucially relevant to deserve to be the object of the revelation? My aim is to answer these questions by taking a peek at a few Philologous fragments. But first, a quick note. We don't have time to discuss the authenticity of Philologous books. Okay? This is something that Burkert and Kahn and Hoffman have done very clearly. So text number 2, this is the way Philologous' book begins. The work on nature began with the following statement. Nature, in the ordering of the world, resulted from the agreement of unlimited things, and so the entire cosmos and all things that are in it. It is the introduction of the terms apera and peiranonta what particularly draws our attention here. In a search for the definition of thesis ento cosmo, of a kind of a rationality internal to nature, Philologous does not claim, as Aristotle got us all used to believe in a way, that all is number, but rather that there is an agreement of unlimited and limited things. There is a terminological detail that deserves to be highlighted here. Philologous does not use the terms unlimited, limited, but always only the plural, apera and peiranonta. A more philologically faithful and philosophically fruitful translation would be unlimited and limited things, the latter being the present participle of the verb peirano. On the other hand, in Plato's Philologous, and also in Aristotle's Metaphysics, the terms are thought and used in the singular, not in the plural. The name peras, for limit, or the passive participle of the verb peirano, peperasmenon, for limited, and the neuter singular adjective apeiron, preceded by the article to, apeiron, the unlimited, all of them in singular. This distinction in quantity could indicate that Philologous will not understand this principle as metaphysicals in the way they will be understood then by Plato and Aristotle. And this is probably for this reason that Plato and Aristotle will use the singular and not the original plural. This is confirmed by Philologous Fragment 2, which, using the same terminology of the agreement of unlimited and limited of Fragment 1, spells out more clearly what should be the reach of his theory. And this is text number 3 in the handout. So, Fragment 2 leaves no doubt that Philologous' limited and unlimited things are attributes of reality itself, not abstract principles, which are separated from the world. This is why the fragment describes the limited, unlimited as evident, that is, as manifest in the world. Philologous insists on this specific manifestation, I would say, 4 times, using terms semantically related to a manifest appearance. Finitae eonta, show clearly the things they are. Delon, it is clear from the gleam. Deloi entoi ergois, it is shown by the facts. And phaneontai, they seem unlimited. I have always regarded this natural evidence of the limited and unlimited things as a proof of the originality of Philologous fragments, in the sense that this would hardly to be an outcome of a Platonization of Philologous thoughts for obvious reason. What matters most is that acknowledging this Philologous difference allow us to throw a light to the passage of the Philebus I quoted above, and rethink, hopefully, the way I translated the adverb aei, following some of the major translators and commentators. Quoting, the things that always be were said, the things that always be were said and will be said, things that be. They have in them, by nature, limit and unlimited. This is a translation from Stryker, for example, or Migliori more recently. This will make the forms the subject matter of the passage, the forms, the ideas. Actually, I realize we could alternatively, and following, for example, Gosling, translate aei from time to time, and Uffman, that translated in each case, and point to a striking parallel for this use of aei exactly in this fragment 2 of Philologous. And I'm quoting Uffman here. The point in that each time we consider something as existing, we have to assume that it has limits and unlimited in it by nature. So in this case, IA would shift from being to saying, and would not imply we are already fully immersed in the theory of the eternal forms in this specific line of the dialogue. Gosling is right to emphasize that it would be strange to attribute, for Plato, of course, to attribute to Pythagoras a doctrine about form if he's the Prometheus. At the same time, I would probably seem quite odd to assign a theory of the forms to oipalaioi, the ancients. The fact is that Philolaus looks really not willing to work within the idea of separation of abstract principle from the sensible world, as we saw from the first two fragments. And Plato could be simply acknowledging this in 16c 910 without jumping to the forms in the middle of the description of this ancient method. I would then suggest that this would be a more coherent move from him, at least. So the plurality and naturalness of the unlimited limiting things, in the sense of them being attributes of physis understood as real nature, are also confirmed by the fact that Philolaus refuses to define or enumerate exactly what realities are limited and unlimited. That is, he's refusing to give a list of limited principles and unlimited principles, such as, for example, water or fire or something else. And this is the fragment number 4. So this is far from merely an example of epistemic modesty that is customary in the archaic thought, as Kant pointed out. I think that the reference to the divine, similarly quite abundant in the pages of Philebus I mentioned before, presents itself as an anti-ionic statement. The definition of the ultimate reality is so beyond the capabilities of human knowledge that it would be more appropriate to content oneself to establish that all reality must have arisen in some way, out of the limited and unlimited, rather than to awkwardly imagine water or air to be archaic, as the Ionians did. If anything is knowable, it is the physical world, the reality of visible things. So the path, the method of Philolaus is certainly unique, even within the pre-Socratic philosophy. On one hand, he does not express a monist position, since being results from a plurality of unlimited and limited things. On the other hand, the epistemological skepticism of fragment 6, I quoted right now, is somehow moderated by the possibility of knowing at least two things: that everything in this world is made up of a plurality, and this plurality is held together, tuned by the harmonia. It is precisely the harmonia, the tuning, the armochte between the limited and unlimited that helps explain the coming to be of everything. We find the very same concern with the possibility of grasping some knowledge of the plurality between limiting and unlimited in the next page of Philebus. And this is text number 5, yes. So Socrates' dialectikos method in this text is all about finding the exact number within the plurality that is the very structure, diakekos menenon, of the reality. I'm sure you all are probably already expecting my following move. Yes, we can find in Philolaus a similar role for number in their relationship with the limited and unlimited. It is fragment 4, the one that more precisely indicates the role of number in his philosophy. And this is text number 6. I will quote this text number 6, says Philolaus, and really all things that are known have numbers. Thus, it is not possible that something is thought or known without numbers. The second part of the fragment leaves no doubt that the role, what kind of role must be assigned to number. Their function is precisely epistemological. Thanks to the fact that reality has a number, it is liable to a numeric description and can be known. This is modern science, I would say. Yeah, Galileo was saying exactly the same thing. Philologous does not say that reality as such is a number, something probably Aristotle would say, but that reality is knowable through numbers. So let's press on a little bit in our comparative endeavor between Plato and Philologous. We saw in Philologous Fragment 6 that the introduction of a third element, harmony, tuning of the limited and unlimited, makes Philologous start looking for example of how things are tuned. And this is fragment number 7 from Philologous, text number 8 in the handout. Quoting, the first tune, the one in the middle of the sphere, is called fire. Fire seems to lend itself well to Philologous' explanatory intention. Although fire is in principle unlimited, since it is at the center of the sphere, it is simultaneously limited. It is possible that Philologous' reference to fire as the center of the sphere may explain exactly Plato's use of a Promethean reference to introduce Pythagorean theories of limited and unlimited, fire and Prometheus, of course. However, I must concede, this may simply be accidental conceptual assonance by myself, probably. So, interestingly enough, Frank notes that precisely this need to provide proofs, to provide some kind of example of their arguments, would be an unequivocal signal that Philologous' fragments were an Hellenistic forgery. But, well, actually, Plato himself does exactly the same thing in the Philologous. In fact, Protarchus, who seems unable to even keep up with the sudden metaphysical turn of this argument, throws in the towel like a boxer. Socrates replies with 2 clarifying examples. The first, unknowingly didactics, appeal to the phonetics, and it is the sound emitted by our mouth and pronounced the letter of the alphabet. I will skip this one for you. The second example chosen by Socrates is musical. He argues that knowing 3 tones, one low, one high, and one intermediate, still does not make us musical experts. And this is the text number 9 I will skip. Of course, the analysis of music requires careful knowledge of limits, intervals, correlations between different sounds. This will be knowledge of the numbers that constitute the sound. As you know, as musician, you all know that how much this is important for a musician. This knowledge of the number in things is what makes you fit for the job and for the honors that come from a life of intelligence, while the unlimited multitude deprives you of real knowledge. So the 2 examples drawn on the way in which we can explain reality through an appeal to a web of relationships that constitute the infinite number of things and the infinite number that is present in each one of them. The discovery of this systematic explanation is attributed to Plato's predecessor, Oiprosthenes. Very significant, I think, the term systemata is used to indicate system of conjunctions of intervals, which are also called harmonia. In Aristoxenus, for example, the latter term, harmonia, will come to mean musical scales. Barker argued this is exactly the way an ancient Pythagorean musicologist, so to say, of course the term is mine, would describe this phenomenon. I'm quoting Barker: the organization of pitches within a framework to form a genuinely ontological, musical harmonia will specify a sharply determined set of relative values And everything that lies between the terms of this relation will indeed be apeiron, external and irrelevant to the musical domain, and brought into no mathematical connection with the elements of the privileged pattern. In fact, the most interesting relation between the Philologos and Philolaus lies exactly in their discussion of the musical scale. Philolaus, as we saw from the fragment 7 on the central fire, is also looking for an example. He too, as Socrates, finds especially clarifying to refer to music. In the second part of fragment 6, he defines the musical scale as a magnitude of agreement, harmonia megathos, in a Pythagorean diatonic scale. You know that antiguos also assume this Pythagorean diatonic scale. And this is text number 10. Here, in this text, the image of limited and unlimited, as in music theory and the example of Plato using Philologos, is that of musical stream, continuous and unlimited, in which specified intervals are defined and delimited. So harmony, the agreement, should never be confused with the limiting factor itself. The agreement works through the number, but the number and the agreement are not replaced by the limit. I find the evidence arising from comparing Philologous fragments and this Philologos page, in my view, are quite compelling. Some authors, I can quote Benitez, for example, seeks to deny the connection between the method in the Philologos and any Pythagorean source, recalling that the concept of apeiron and peras were widely used in pre-Socratic philosophy in general, and not only in Pythagoreanism. They were used, in fact, but unlike the Pythagoreans, the other pre-Socratics generally give priority to one of these concepts to the detriment of the other, which makes the reference to Pythagoreanism in this passage much more plausible, and I agree with the Cominet on this. Here, as well as in Plato's Philologos, the duality is not reducible, and that's the point, I think. I understand we are not facing in the Philologos a generic and vague reference to some oikalumenoi Pythagoreans, as Aristotle said, but something much more precise than that. It is not just the concepts of limit and unlimited that Plato is borrowing from Philolaus, but an entire approach to explaining reality. In fact, the first crucial feature of the method, as Plato goes on to describe, is that it is not enough for someone to recognize that each thing has a one and a many, a limit and an unlimited in it, but that philosophical argument, as opposed to sophistic argument, requires us to see the complete number of each thing between the indeterminate and the one. And this is a quotation from Uffman. I think you get it very well. As we saw from Philologous fragment, this is exactly his own point. Of course, Plato starts from it to pursue his own path, away from a normal pre-Socratic physiologist approach, as seemed to emerge from Philologous fragments. The first crucial feature of the path, of the method, we could say, I had the double Pythagorean concept, limited, unlimited, allows Plato to build up a quite solid ontological foundation for his own double concept of one many, in the sense that it is the action of limited and unlimited that enables reality to be one and manifold. This ends being a strong statement about the reality of the things that are, and an originally Platonic one. So Plato methodology and its deliberate use of dual principle aims to draw a contrast with a problematic heuristic method. Certain wise men of today, oi denunton anthropon sophoi, the syntactical construction of this expression leaves no doubt about the irony of this identification, oi denunton anthropon sophoi, denun, merely place one at random, immediately passing to the infinite. Placing one at random, it doesn't make any sense. and escaping contemporarily from the intermediate reality. Socrates, on the other hand, carefully follows a path, a kind of hodos, the method of dialectic, which will correctly solve the problem of the relation, of the unity with the infinite, as well as grant a solution to the greater problem of determining the place of pleasure in the good life. This method allows Plato to draw an analogy between the goodness of a life of many mixed goods and the ontological structure of reality as a mix of peras and apera. So, yes, I will skip some points. I think they're not really important because I think I can see that my time is running out. So these passages from the Philologous, I agree. I think that they are central to the definition of dialectics, of the limited or limited, and the ontology of one and many. I guess they can reveal the Pythagorean roots of the Platonic theory of the principle. We can see here Plato concerned to develop his theory in direction of natural philosophy, that is to say, in the direction of pre-Socratic cosmology. This is a reversal of the movement reported in the Phaedo, for example, where Socrates turns away from Anaxagoras and the science of nature in order to pursue his own method of logoi. So these ancient Pythagorean roots are welcomed now by Plato's text and then reinterpreted by the Academy, which keep engaging with the Pythagorean epistemological and metaphysical effort. Although the Pythagoreans are the source of the dialectic argument in the Philologous, the final argument is the result of the Platonic philosophical outlook. Indeed, in the conclusive summary of the whole argument, and you can see above the text number 11, Plato introduces a third element besides the opposition of limited and unlimited. There is a somewhat mixed, combined thing, anti-sumisgomenon, says the Greek, that originates from both. He had famously a fourth element, the idea, the cause of that mixture. The argument is developed entirely within the full scope of Plato's theoretical philosophy. Despite recognizing the theory of limited and unlimited as Pythagorean, we can finally say now, more precisely, I will say Philo-like, Plato develops the argument in a novel way. Of course, this modification of Pythagorean view would not have been sanctioned by Philolaus himself. The methodological adoption by Plato of previous Pythagorean doctrines corresponds to a first movement of that beautiful path that I have called elsewhere the Platonic mediation or conciliation of Pythagoreanism. In the Philologous, Plato begins with the unlimited, thought by the Pythagoreans to be a spatial and numerical plurality, and transforms it into an indefinite quantity, opening the door to the theory of the forms and its indefinite dyad. But that's totally another story, which perhaps we will tell another time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Gabriele for your excellent presentation. Now we have some time for questions, discussion, etc. So I'll wait for you to raise your hands, your virtual hands. There is a question by Fabian Mier, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Gabriele. I have enjoyed your talk. I like very much too the Philologous, and this connection with Philolaus is something that I haven't explored properly. I have some questions for clarification, for suggestions, or in general to see what you think about this. The first one is just a curiosity. Perhaps you come back in your handout to your first text. Just, sorry if I missed something, of course. I think it is fragment 1 of Philologous, namely just why you are a specialist about this. Of course, I'm not. Why do you translate ex apeiron te kai perai nonton as, or you, or the translation you take, as of and not from? It's just because from the agreement, from the unlimited, to avoid this duplication, so to say, or why exactly? Let's go piece by piece, if I may.
Sorry, so this is the text number 2 in the handout.
Yes, yes,
right?
yes.
The first fragment.
Yes, yes.
Yes. So the idea of armoxe ex, that's the question.
So why, the idea is why do you translate ex apeiron te kai peirai nonton, which is of course very, very important in this, well, difficult text, as of and not as from, but not as from.
Yes, I translated as resulted from. That's from the agreement. From the agreement of the. So X is the translation is resulted from. X is resulted from. So the ordering ex apeiron, yeah. And you will suggest in English would be better phrase like of.
No. On the contrary.
No. Sorry, I couldn't understand. Sorry.
Yes. Let me take a look at the text. Periphyseos hon arche ede. You have ede or hede there. Hede. Hafusis de entokosmon harmothe. My question is about the meaning of ex in ex apeiron te kai peirai nonton. Does it mean origin? Does it mean constitution? Does it mean also in regard, and that would be a related question about this topic from my side, namely, you denied or seem to deny it, that Philologous has an ontological approach to this. At some point you mentioned that, and my curiosity is, what how do we have to understand these things are made from the limited and the unlimited, if it is not in a way, well, ontologically oriented, so to say, even if not Platonic, of course.
Sorry. Yeah, no, thank you very much, Fabian. Now I understood what was the point. So the X, I don't think, maybe I wasn't very clear about it. Usually I'm not very clear about that. So on trying to show that Philologous has a kind of an epistemological grip on these things, which is very modern in a way, I'm not denying that there is a metaphysical approach from Philologous. What I think that is metaphysical, however, is that it is in the reality, not some kind of external separate. There is no chorismos. This is the only difference I will say from Plato, between Plato and Philologous. So if you understand ontology as how things work, you know, how the reality is made of course, there is a metaphysical statement in Philologous. So the harmony of the things that are comes from apeiron, so apera and peranata. So I just want to stress a bit more, maybe, that along with this metaphysical approach, I think there is a kind of, you know, we could have a Parmenian Philologous saying, just to make an example, saying that things are this way, but are not knowable. You know, like you can't really know how things are. But I think that Philologous is more modern in a way, because it's saying that both things, so things are made in this way, And you can sense, you can understand, you can know how things are because they have number in it. So that's a thing. So I really think that Philologos was a very interesting interlocutor to Plato, I would say, because two of the main problems of knowability of the world and at the same time of the mathematics were already there.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Just a little question. What is the role exactly of harmogthe there? Harmogthe ex apeiron in the same fragment 1. I cannot get that.
Sorry. I muted myself, sorry. So what's, yes, so I was translating harmogthe here as the ordering of the word, the harmony of the word.
The harmony of the word.
Coming from the agreement of unlimited and limited things. So, no, sorry. So the ordering in this cosmos, the agreement of unlimited and limited things is the harmogthe ex apeiron. So it's the agreement, the harmony in a way of agreement of limited and unlimited. That was my translation, yes. I think that the agreement is I don't remember who translated this as agreement first, actually, but it's a kind of classic way of translating harmony. Because, of course, you want to escape from a pure musical metaphor here. You need to push to kind of a more philosophical thing. So what is harmony in between two principles? They agree with them. But I'm not sure we can, I'm not very, I wouldn't put my hand in a fire for this translation, of course. If you have a better suggestion, I would love to hear it.
Okay, thanks very much. Now there is a question by Pietro Montanari, please.
Okay, thanks a lot, Gabriele. I'm very inspired by your talk, and I will have a lot of questions, but I have to sum up. And so, can I try to translate into Italian that same passage that Fabian was looking at now? Potrebbe essere che le cose che sempre sono dette essere o che sempre sono dette che sono risultano dall'uno e dai molti. Limite e illimitatezza stanno in esse connaturati. Do you think that this can work? And then I have another question. This just to now.
Pietro,
sì.
Puoi ripeti ancora una volta? Sì.
Che le cose, aspetta che mentre lo dico lo guardo anch'io perché sennò, che le cose che sono che le cose che sempre sono dette essere, ossia che le cose che sempre sono dette che sono, risultano dall'uno e dai molti, limite. No, perdonami. Poiché le cose...
Non è frammento 1.
Questa parte hos ex genos men kai pollon onton tonei.
Qual è il frammento?
No, scusami, è il tuo handout 1, perdonami.
Ecco, sì, bravo.
Sì. Quindi qui sarebbe, poiché le cose che sempre sono dette essere, o poiché le cose che sempre sono dette che sono, risultano dall'uno e dai molti. Per questo limite e il limite stanno in esse connaturati. Quindi sarebbe come dire uno e molti sono l'effetto, il limite e il limite sono la causa in qualche modo, no? Questo è il senso, vero?
Sì, yes, I believe so. So, il senso fondamentale qua è che Platone sta usando limite e illimitato come dispositivi di origine che fanno originare l'uno in molti, certo, sicuro. Sì, sì, mi sembra
Okay,
di sì.
so just let me, because I'm thinking a lot about this ineffable questions, and so if I understand this passages from Philologous on first principles, we have limited and unlimited things or beings that are eonta, and you suggest not to give these terms a metaphysical sense, that I think that is very good. But they are not properly knowable. They are ineffable because they are prior to this harmonies intervention, no? And then they are ineffable, but somehow they are knowable, at least a priori, we could say, as a condition that we must presuppose for both being and knowledge. So it is necessary to postulate them, to put them, to give account of those ta eonta and their existence. So my question is, do you think that this somewhat Kantian or transcendentalist interpretation of the two principles say too much, is too fantastic, or is there something good in this?
There is something very good in this, I would say. This is the approach many of our commentators use to understand. I'm not sure that this is the only possible way. That's my problem. So I think we are a bit idealist in this approach to the pre-Socratic. We have learned from the beginning of the last century history of philosophy to kind of have this kind of idealistic approach. I think that fragment 4 of Philologous, which is text number 6 in the handout, when it says that pantatagignos komena arithmon ekonti, all things that are known have numbers. This is really, in a way, and so almost an inductive way of knowing things, you know. So you have to grasp reality, find the number in it, and then you can say that you know something, you know. So of course, you can say, but this is not an original fragment. This is probably a forgery. There's no point to discuss. I think that Hoffman, in this 1997 book, proved very clearly that this fragment must be original. And if it's so, I think we have a more, at least an alternative chance to the usual one, to find something really concrete in this epistemological approach in a pre-Socratic like Philologous. They were not just showing off archive, picking things, you know, but they have a clear method. And so that's why I think that Aristotle was, at the end, was right saying that the Pythagoreans, they used to think about number. He was probably thinking about Philologous more than Pythagoras itself. And Omar, my friend Omar here, says can say more about this than I can say myself. So I think that they could. So it's true that probably apera e peranota, they can't be grasped, but you can find signs of this numerical metaphysics inside of the reality. And you have to find it in a way, you know, if you want to know something, you have to find them. So, and I think that Plato understood how powerful was this way of using peiranota e aperon as principles to move reality on, you know. So Plato was, as always, I think Plato was very, very clever on using pre-Socratic for his own good, in a way. And in this case, the Philologous, especially the Philologous case, I think he have done it not only very cleverly, but very elegantly also. It's very elegant the way he's in a dialectic with the Philologous. And this is why I like Plato so much, because he does a wonderful job with his sources. Revitalizzare. So he gives another life to them. That's the idea. Not only kill them in a way, of course, also, not only insert them, but in a way you can understand better what Philologous was trying to say by understanding what Plato has done with Philologous in a way, you know. So I think I'm a Plato lover.
Okay, thank you. There is a final question by Fabian Mier, please.
Okay, thank you. If we have still time, just a little question about the ton ae legomenon in line about you spoke suggesting that we don't have to be committed in this passage of the Philebus 16c, I think 8 or 9. You suggested namely interpreting these lines as referring to the gift of the ancients, etc., etc. It seems a little bit strange to find a commitment to forms immediately. That was your suggestion, and in support of this, I would say that well, ton, namely the line is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, isn't it? Hos ex genos men kai polonon ton ae legomenon einai peras te kai apeirian and autoi sulfiton echonton, etc., etc. But well, this ton ae legomenon could is not a commitment. Is not immediately a commitment, even though Stricker and Maurizio think apparently that it is a reference to the everlasting ideas, etc., etc. It sounds to me as Aristotle has it in Metaphysics Zeta 1, at the end of Zeta 1, namely this famous palaitika nuncrae ae cetumenon in this line. That is 1028b3. I think that I would suggest that the use of ae in this case is just a reference to what is always said and repeated, etc., etc. And in Schleiermacher translation, we have jedes Mal, namely ever again, or something like that. So not a commitment to everlasting ideas or eternal ideas.
Yes, no, good. Thank you, Fabian. Yeah, this is a very nice, I will definitely add a note on this, especially in the Schleiermacher translation. I think it's a very good idea. I agree with you, of course. There's some of our beloved friends and colleagues, they were trying to find forms, eternal forms in Plato all over the place. Plato was way better than that. He was discussing many possibilities of understanding the world. One of them was the theory of the forms, but probably not in this case. Thank you very much.
Okay. There is no more time for discussion of this so interesting question that you have presented to us. We thank you very much for your suggestions, for your excellent answers to the discussion. But now we have to move on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabriele. Grazie tante. Now we have our second speaker, who is nothing else but the organizer itself of the conference, of this conference. This is Pietro Montanari. I read in Spanish. Es licenciado por la Universidad de Bolonia. Ha realizado estudios de posgrado en esa misma universidad, además de en Venecia, Madrid y Montpellier. Es doctor en letras por la UNAM y ha efectuado estancias académicas en la Eberhard Karls Universität de Tubinga y en la Brown University. Actualmente es profesor e investigador de tiempo completo en el Departamento de Filosofía de la Universidad de Guadalajara y ha publicado extensamente sobre Platón y sobre otros aspectos también de filosofía moderna. Y entonces le damos la palabra sin más. Pietro, gracias también por este espacio que estamos teniendo. Gracias a ti, a tu esfuerzo.
Gracias a ustedes. Entonces ahora le toca tolerar estos 40 minutos, porque, no, miren, se los voy a compartir con ustedes con mucha preocupación y vamos a ver qué van a pensar de estas cosas que le presento. Estoy un poco nervioso. Déjenme ver aquí. Okay. So I'm going to talk in English because there is, I think, someone who otherwise could not understand, and so my talk is bad faith and luck in Plato, in Platonic way to science. Let me begin with a sort of with this part about bad faith. I would start with a passage from Laches, where Nicias is talking with Lysimachus or Laches himself, and provides this description of what does it mean to have a conversation with Socrates. And from the passage, it results that the dialogue with Socrates is a test that one has to endure, from which one perhaps would prefer to escape. And Socrates requires the interlocutor to give an account of himself, to remember that there is a problem with oneself, with the way one lives, one believes. And so a conversation is not so much about this or that topic, but about us, about ourselves. Typically, this is a test of the soul. And yet, if one is willing to tolerate, to endure this test, if one does not escape it, it eventually gives also pleasure, and anyway helps and becomes habitual, a habit. Socrates, this is what the passage suggests, brings to the fore something out of tune in his counterparts, a problem that they may already be half aware of, and they only need to be guided by him to remember and become fully conscious of this problem. All this made me think of Socrates' interlocutor as someone who is experiencing or is induced to experience a condition of cognitive dissonance. In the sense given to this term expression by Leon Festinger, with his famous theory published in 1957. You can see in the PowerPoint a very short summary of the theory. Now, Socrates' counterparts tend to react to that dissonance, mostly in the same sense predicted by the theory, that is, through avoidance strategies, without changing attitude and settling the problem. They don't want to know about it. They don't want to be led to remember, and they rather flee. And well, these are reactions that often imply self-deception. Now, the importance of cognitive dissonance and self-deception in human experience seems to me attested in many Platonic passages. Indeed, fits pretty well with this theory, with is psychology and anthropology. Let's consider, for instance, this passage from the Republic 10th book about mimetic tragic representation, just to give an example. You all know very well this passage, so I'm not going to read it. This passage shows how the subject, the subjectivity, is normally the recipient of illusions, deception of many sorts. Side provides here an example for perceptual illusions. And this example is then extended to psyche in general, to the soul in general, which so appear as both the producer and the victim of a deeper and wider condition of perturbation, tarake. Plato ascribes this endemic and de facto systematic confusion to an internal strife, a civil war. This is very famous as a theme in Plato, that is waged constantly within the soul, and attributes to the logistikon, which is the higher function, the higher ergon of the psyche, the task of relieving the soul in general from such a condition. Usually, when the logistikon does not take care of the problem, the psyche somehow intervenes to fix it. But this is precisely this natural, unguided intervention that produces self-deception, problems, illusions, and so on. So such seems to be the epistemic default condition for most individuals, except some rare cases. Self-deception is also often represented by Plato as resulting in what we may call general beliefs, big questions, long speeches, worldviews, popular opinions, what sometimes the text referred to as megalegei, no? A sort of empty, boastful talk without head or tail. Also fluaria, perhaps, idle talk, and other synonyms. The term bad faith, I choose it for, it comes from Jean-Paul Sartre, as you know. The French expression is mauvaise foi, who was, I use this expression here just to denote a condition where self-deception has become ordinary, systematic, and protracted. Sartre and others after him, like Amélie Rorty and John Elster, put emphasis on the prolonged, not episodic, projectual character of this delusional condition. They also refer to self-deception as a process that entails some kind of consciousness of what is going on, that there is a problem. Now, to this condition, or to something that looks very much like it, in my opinion, Plato also gives a name, and this name is amathia, which he repeatedly defined as the greatest of all evils, and he also gave a name to its cure, elenkos, the refutation method, understood as a removal of misleading opinions, ekbole, tes doxes, or also a remedy, purification, katharmos. You can see in the PowerPoint this very famous passage from the Sophist. Actually, well, the central feature of the elenctic approach, as it is presented by Plato here, seems precisely that of inducing a subject who is in bad faith, in amathia, to face that condition, cope with it without running away, as it would be natural for most people. Plato provides a comprehensive phenomenology of this experience, of this therapy, the elenkos, I mean, which also includes related emotions and mental states, such as shame or docility. We talk about, we have talked about that this morning with Laura. And the passage also confirms that this removal or throwing out, ekbole, however painful, is finally described as a lasting gain for the subject and a source of pleasure to him, or at least who witnessed it. Now, what about the motivations? Why subjects, individuals, so normally end up being caught in a bad faith condition? Of course, Sartre and Heidegger would have their own ideas about this, but what about Plato? Now, in a negative sense, Plato often says that what induces someone to amathia is not truly erotic desire, no, prothemia sophogenestai or epithemia to eidenai is all but this. And so this is a negative response. But there is also in some passages some kind of fundamental motivation that is more positively provided. Consider, for instance, this passage from the 5th book of the Laws, where the cause for amathia is identified with a powerful natural emphaton drive to exceed in self-love, sphodra heu philia, that is with self-centered nature of the subject, which is seen as the source of most of our biases. This seems to be, to me, a remarkable observation, also in the light of present research in social and experimental psychology. It seems, however, that such a type of subjectivity is naturally precluded from qualifying as epistemic, at least by Plato, very high standards. Well, the removal or purification of this distortion of the mind, which fatally produces crippled logoi, is in Plato the real starting point, as it seems, of science. So Plato, this is my idea, portrays true knowledge, in particular about tamegista, as a long path of conversion of the soul, which is at the same time a process of individual liberation. And the first step on this path, the most necessary of all, perhaps, is liberation from bad faith. Liberation then not so much from false beliefs, but from a chain of self-centered concerns, confusions, inconsistencies, which is the outcome of a prolonged projectual, as Sartre would say, and half-aware exposure to self-deception and propensity for self-deception. Well, after this step, the epistemic subject is on the way to defining himself a lucky eudaimon, assisted in his quest by good fortune, so destined to fare better, whatever may happen, including death, and will be more and more so to the extent he proceeds along his path of research and liberation, which is apparently a way to assimilation to God, homoiosis theory. And then about Tyche, luck or fate, as I would propose also. There will be many passages, at least I think 2 or 3 dozen in Plato that would deserve to be read and commented carefully. The occurrences of the term are I think, but this is not an exact figure, over 120, and without counting the verbal forms, adjectives, adverbs, and so and almost half of the total is found in the laws or in the epistles. There is no univocal and clear concept of Tyche in Plato. The term oscillates among different, sometimes even opposed meanings, but there are some tendencies, important tendencies, that on occasions are explicit and clear, at least clear enough to allow a partial conceptualization. In the PowerPoint number 9, you can see a list of the most important aspects, groups of meaning related to Tyche in Plato. I'm still in an early stage on this, and so this is just a general frame, a tentative frame. We are going to talk about just the point number 4, this semantic cluster here. And there is also another PowerPoint where you can see a list of meanings of Tyche in Plutarch, many of which we also find in Plato, except for the first one, la dea. No? I see no personification of Tyche in Plato as a goddess. Tyche is divine, is quite often associated with God and divinity. This indeed is one of the strongest, almost systematic tendencies in Plato, as in Pindar before him. But it is not presented as a goddess, as I said. It rather seems that the name given to the effect of an action which is led by divinity. Action whose sense is difficult or perhaps impossible to devise for human. Fortune is linked traditionally to the image of the wheel, which becomes popular in the late antiquity and the Middle Ages. In Plato, there is no wheel image applied to fortune, but of course there are representations of Tyche in terms of unexpected reversal of fate, twists and turns of the events. And just to have an idea of what a wheel representation of fortune may be, however, no mention of wheels is made in it, let's consider a famous passage from Demetrius Pharaohs here, that refers to the power of the Persians subjugated by the Macedonians and prophetically alludes to a future reversal of the Macedonians themselves by the Roman, as Polybius comments. Plutarch reports also another saying of Demetrius Phalareus, who this time comments on some verses by Euripides, and you can find here also this text. Well, now, in many Platonic representation of Tyche, I see not so much this kind of representation of the fate. This kind of representation of Tyche, but the representation of fate or individual destiny or that of some strong causal force of some spiritual or moral nature. And consider, for instance, this passage from the 5th book of the Laws. Here, as you see, is far more complex than the representation of the wheel. It stresses not so much the idea of the turning of fortune, but rather its obstinacy, which you can even visualize here, thanks to the presence of certain demons at plural in bad luck, while only one demon at singular is mentioned for the good luck, who are in charge of keeping the train of the events on a certain direction, on a certain tracks. And the passage comes immediately after those reflections on Amathia that we mentioned at the beginning. The relation between the demonic and soul is important and well known. I just mentioned a few points that you already know very well. A daimon in Plato in general is a minor divine entity that plays a role in the general cosmic design, for instance, making communication possible between men and gods, between separate ontological levels. Also a kind of individual helper or guardian of personal destiny, and this would be its eschatological function. Then is the form, eidos, of human soul, so its superior part, which is also entrusted to perform a mediating function. And lastly, to daimonic, the Socratic sign or voice. So this to stress that there is a connection between daimon and Tyche and between Tyche and soul. And the connection is traditional, of course. You might find it in Orphics, among the philosophers is found in Heraclitus and Democritus. But, well, let's see, for instance, just to move on a little bit, this passage from the Hippias Major, where Socrates refers to a daimoniatis Tyche. Such is a sort of demonic force, demonic fate. It seems to me that here Tyche denotes an active, efficient force that moves the subject in a certain sense, and apparently always in the same sense, producing eventually a regular occurrence, establishing a pattern of behavior and phenomenal states. And also represented in this passage, along with the pattern, is the influence of forces that are different from the agent and apparently beyond his control or having power on him. So, kateko, which is a strong verb that could mean hold back, check, restrain, but also possess, occupy, and master. There is another passage from the Symposium that is usually translated, as much as I see, as condition, state, case. Here, Tyche, this is the traditional translation of Tyche, but denotes perhaps something more specific. I would suggest that it denotes the nature of the structure or the structure of a certain being, in this case, Eros. No? So this nature, this structure defines from the beginning, ab origine, the action that this being or entity, Eros, will perform. So Eros is born of Poros and Penia, and the day of Aphrodite is generated, and so on. So this birth, this genesis, is the cause, is the idea, the structure, the originary structure that conditions at every given time, at every given moment, what Eros is and does. So the origin of Eros is the nature of structure in which the action of the god is inscribed. Tyche refers here to fuses to daimonos, to the nature of the god, of the demon. So far, we have two possible more delimited meanings for Tyche as fate. So the first, individual personal destiny in connection with daimon. Second, original structure of fate, which determines the way a certain being is and develops. There could be also a third meaning of Tyche as fate, which extends the previous one to what we may call a sort of moral determinism, which Plato very often uses and projects onto historical processes to find their best explanation. So there are a couple of interesting passages from the third book of the Laws, where two opposite meanings of Tyche are provided in the space of the same account. In the first passages, the Athenian tells the story of the ancient Doric confederation and of the Tyche that brought such a powerful political system, to Teuton system, to destruction, namely a causal drive that is of spiritual nature. The drive is hemegista amathia, no? is what we have seen, the worst kind of self-deception. And likewise, the same remarks apply also to the second case, the second passage, which tells about some Persian dynasties educated according to the bad customs of the Medes, which were brought to failure not by a generic whim of fortune, but by an inner necessity, a fault of a spiritual nature. No, Aitia is here once again hamartema. And once again, the finger is pointed at the moral drive of the events, the kakos bios, which is another byproduct of amatia. Except that in this case, tyche seems to have an opposite meaning, that of a mere accident. No? So this is the sign of instability, semantic instability of this word in Plato. Now, the connection of tyche with the soul paves the way to a range of possibilities for connecting tyche also with knowledge, virtue, dialogue, and this is what we're going to do now. Let's consider knowledge and virtue, for instance. It is commonly recognized that the few times Plato alludes to the most important dogmata or mathemata, more than dogmata, in his philosophy, as well as when he speaks of the virtues, he seems to have radical doubts about their teachability. I will argue that these doubts are connected with tyche. As for virtues, consider, for example, this passage from the Meno. The discussion here is about the respective status of true beliefs, and science. So, orthe, alethes, doxa on one side, and episteme on the other. Opposite traits are established for each term. True doxa is unstable, sometimes succeeds, sometimes fails, cannot be taught because there are no masters, and so on, while episteme is all the opposite. Socrates can therefore claim that even if virtue is not science, but only true belief, doxa, it is nonetheless good and entitled to guide men, is a secure guidance for men. And he says, and he says this based on a reasoning that we can sum up as follows. If there is something that is good, and if this something is produced apo tyches, then this something is not produced by human guidance, but by divine tyche. In this case, Allah Theia Moira. So there is an equivalence between tyche and Theia Moira. Since virtue is good and men do not become virtuous by science, so they will become virtuous by divine inspiration or divine will, like poets, seers, and also in this passage, the politician, curiously. And virtue is a demodus arete, a folk wisdom, folk virtue. One is virtuous without exactly knowing how or why. And here, as you can see, the meaning of tyche is shifting to that of a divinity, Theia Moira, a divine action, a kind of divinely inspired action, which is part of a bigger plan that is not in human power to understand. And there are, well, then the second point, about mathemata. Plato speaks of this mathemata doctrines, the most important doctrines of his thoughts, I don't know, as generally as low, difficult, unpredictable acquisitions that are subject to many variables and influences, and over which the subject does not really seem to have much control. In the seventh letter, for example, he suggests not so much the unteachability of the doctrines, but rather points out that their teaching is subject to very narrow conditions. So I would call it near unteachability, something like this. The passage also reminds us about bad faith by referring to feelings that seem motivated by an excess of self-love. For example, this irrational contempt, kataphronesis, ukorthe. and haughty and empty hope. However, when it comes to know how exactly the apprehension of this mathemata works, the text points out that such learning, even in the case of those very few psychi who are capable of it, gifted and skilled, does not happen in an easy, predictable way. While Tyche is not mentioned, it seems obvious to me that the subject does not reach that fortunate, lucky illumination, assuming he does, by dialectical skills and conscious effort alone. Rather, the apprehensions of this mathemata happens, it comes, arises at some point in the soul, ente psyche genomenon, including the maintenance and the reinforcement of that event is described as a self-sustaining process. The subject seems relatively passive in all this process. And the event of apprehension also depends on a contact, implies a direct relationship, kind of affinity, syngeneia, which would seem to be definitely pre-extra or non-verbal in nature. It's a long debate in Platonic studies. And the demonic plays here some specific essential role. I could not say what exactly, but Laura Candiotto, I believe, is on the right track about this, but I can comment on her now. Whatever may be the case, what matters most to us now is that the subject cannot produce such an event at will, nor through learned notions, nor through practice and techniques. So polle sinusia peritopragma is not enough here, nor he can understand what happens for what it is, what happens to him for what it is, but apparently can only live this experience at the moment it occurs and try to propitiate that event through different converging strategies, as assiduous dialectical work, a good regimen of life, invocations of divine assistance, and so on. Of such an event, then, one may just say that at some point, perhaps all of a sudden, exciphens, it happens to a certain subject, and yet the representation of what exactly happens here remains obscure, ineffable to him, beyond his comprehension. And this is what I would call heteronomy of the epistemic subject in Plato. Heteronomy with respect to the process of knowledge and its highest achievements, which strictly speaking do not depend on the subject, but are thought of as events. Plato speaks here of pleasure and pain and of their mental projections. Hope. This is the passage from the Laws. Such heteronomy also results from a passage from the first book of the Laws, and from another one that is very similar in Republic, 10th. And Plato speaks here of pleasure and pain and of their mental projections, hope and fear, conceiving them as two paths, fundamental emotional drives. I don't know how to translate them exactly. To which he adds a third one, calculation or reasoning, logismos, which is presented as the golden and sacred guide, which stands above the two paths and can also coincide with the nomos of the city. And these three paths, or reasoning is a pathos, are described metaphorically as strings and chords, neura esmerinthoitinus, while the subject would be nothing more than an amazing piece of art assembled by the gods, a device moved by those strings, or likewise a toy in the hands of the gods. And so, rather a passive and inert entity. Now, it would be question for me of knowing how this puppet, being a puppet, could ever be capable of that active propulsion that seems to be needed to second favor the pull of the golden cord, the pull of reason. Indeed, the passage of the laws mentions helpers, hyperetai, and some hypotheses can be made about this, but I cannot insist on this now. Let me remind that the rational part of the function, that the rational part or function of the psyche, logismos or logistikon here, is presented as divine by Timaeus, who calls it to kuriotaton, that is the truly sovereign part of the soul. And he says that this part has been given to us by the God as a daimon, and the soul must take care of it. This perhaps may explain the singular form that we observed in the earlier passage about the daimon of good luck in the laws. But now, it seems legitimate to ask what is left of man, of the human subject, once we have set aside all those forces, including reasoning, that pass through him, pull him here and there, and shape him as a sort of amazing device. Is there properly something human in that thauma, or is it just an artifact made of many parts put together? Look carefully, I'm not asking whether there is a human self or a center of personal agency, because I think that there is a center, and the center is the self. And the center, this self in Plato, is the golden part of the soul. So it is reason, is logistikon. But this is not man, apparently it is a God. So I'm just asking if we can find something within the soul, within the human soul, that Plato considers specifically human in its own right, so giving some sense to the expression, to expressions like one must follow the guidance of reason, one must obey the laws, one is amathes, one must search the truth, and so on. This is, to me, an important problem with Plato. And there is, as I said, another very important passage from the Republic, which is strictly connected, as Shopsdow comments, strictly connected to this one in the laws, but I cannot discuss properly now this. I just would like to say that from this passage, what is evident is that this phantom-like human subject must learn to rely on fate, to abandon himself to what happens, deliberate and dispose over what occurs to him without giving it too much importance. This Hosper and Tose Cuban, as if he were throwing dice. You know? It is therefore suggested in this passage that throwing dice and following the golden and holy pull of logismos seems to be the same. And if you follow the reason, ipso facto, trusting the fate, putting yourself in the hand of fate. And finally, lastly, it is to this sort of lucky dice player that I would like to turn my attention before concluding. Apparently, fate treats him very well, favors him, appears to him always in general as a benign and propitious force, which the text is sometimes referred to as Tyche Metateu or Theia Moira and other similar expressions. Now the point, these are some of the semantic group that we have analyzed so far. Now, the point is, if there is a substantial link between Tyche and Psyche, and we have seen that there is probably this link, this cannot but reverberate on the actions, situations, and therefore also on the logoi, that this lucky man elaborates and produces. And indeed, there are a number of Platonic passages, quite a large number, where such a connection is made explicit. As I say, the passages are many, their frequency may not be a merely accidental fact, so I think. And in many cases, I do not think their significance should be downplayed. So let's see very briefly one or two of them. They are not in the handout, I'm sorry. No, I know, yes, no, I put it on there. There are really a number of passages. And for instance, here in the symposium, Socrates, after Agathon has finished his speech on Eros, praises him with his usual irony, and say that he cannot do anything else but praise by saying the true things, but praise Eros by saying true things. So here there is a connection between Lege and Tyche. And so Tyche is not a dead figuration, meaning accidentally as it happens or spontaneously, but what is meant is that whoever is disposed to tell the truth about something cannot but rely on Tyche for the good choice of words and the good arrangement of the speech. And a similar passage from the Pharaohs. Here Socrates, after proposing a definition of deception, moves on to illustrate what might be a good technique of logoi, and finds a good example in his two previous speeches on Eros. And he says that they were delivered kata tychen, almost playfully, and for that matter, without possessing any technique to legin. And here too, he opposes his speeches to Lysias logos, where the elements on the contrary are arranged in bulk randomly without necessity and internal consistency. He says, on the contrary, that a good logos implies knowledge and method with an explicit reference to the irises. So it follows that the expressions kata tychen and a few pages ahead ek tyches certainly do not mean by chance or accidentally, since they do not refer to Lysias' speech, but to those of Socrates. And there are really many, many more. I cannot see any more of this, but I could say that in general, the text very often suggests that it is possible to take the right path in logoi and in the search for truth, as if we were divinely driven by a propitious wind. And in the laws, there are really very frequent passages where it is said that eutukos, one has embarked on the right skepsis, that the logos moves on katatheon, that is apparently erratic, that it does not proceed without divine inspiration, and so on. And there are also passages in the Parmenides, in Philologous. So, to conclude, that truth is something that the seeker happens to stumble upon is a belief that, in my opinion, can only be explained by the persuasion that research and knowledge as such are opaque processes, not entirely transparent to those who perform them, and fundamentally heteronomous, that is dependent on forces that the subject, at least in part, cannot and even should not master. It is a very common motive in Plato that logoi and logismoi develop under the effect of drives, rational or not, that lead them to success, aporia, or failure. We have seen that such forces are represented sometimes as pathe of the soul, sometimes as daimones. And heteronomy is a fundamental aspect of the Platonic theory of knowledge, I think, and together with the purification from bad faith, from amathia, if you prefer, is important at least in reminding us that the notions of truth, science, and method have here a meaning that is consistent with the spiritual or religious mindset, whose aim is that of individual conversion and liberation. A man who has authentically embarked on a quest for truth is a divinely inspired soul whose logoi are carried by the propitious wind of Tyche. This is my idea, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now we have some minutes for questions, discussions, suggestion, etc. So whoever is willing to ask a question, please raise a virtual hand to las preguntas se pueden hacer en español también, en italiano claramente, sí. Gabriele, por favor.
Voy a hacerla en español. ¿Qué tal?
Bien, bien.
Sí, sí puedo. Sí puedo. No, me gustó muchísimo, Pietro, la idea, una gran cantidad, una generosa filología, diría, ¿no? Muchas cosas. Pero yo preguntarte por un detalle que me interesa mucho más, mucho en el interior de tu charla, que es la idea de la moira, de la conexión entre la Tyche, que puede ser una cosa más simple, digamos, que no sea necesariamente una gran cuestión religiosa o cosmológica también, y la teia moira, exactamente. Lo que te parece, ¿es posible que en Platón las dos cosas sean semejantes, sean civiles, que se encuentren, o son mundos muy distintos, el uso de Tyche con el uso lingüístico y filosófico de la teia moira? ¿Qué te parece? Mas gracias, fue riquísimo.
Gracias a ti, Gabriele. Teia moira, sí. Sabes, en Homero es esta, ¿no? la parte que le debemos a los dioses, o a este orden, ¿no? Este orden que engloba todas las cosas. A mi manera de ver, creo que hay también un estudio que no he podido ver, porque no son tantos los estudios sobre este tema, pero hay uno que es de Edmund Berry, que se llama exactamente así. Si quieres, luego te doy el título, Tyche en teia moira, en el pensamiento griego desde los orígenes hasta Platón, incluyendo Platón. Y no lo he podido ver. ¿Sí? ¿Lo conoces? ¿No? Te lo mando, porque hay uno de Arndt Zimmermann en alemán, hay este otro de Edmund Berry, hay un hermoso libro de Esther Aydin sobre Luck, Fate and Fortune, que ha sido recientemente publicado, y de verdad poco más, por lo menos entre las cosas que yo pude encontrar. Otro libro en alemán que no he podido leer, pero básicamente el libro de Berry sugiere, por lo que he entendido, por la Esther Aydin, que lo comenta, explica la Tyche siempre así, en Platón, casi siempre, con una referencia a Theia Moira, pero puede ser que me he equivocado yo. Si es así, no es posible, porque hay tantos sentidos y significados distintos. Hay significados que tienen a que ver con el mecanicismo, podríamos decir, con el mecanismo, autómaton, esto, con lo que es espontáneo. A mi manera de ver, sí. Cuando tije significa esta acción que es como divinamente inspirada y a las cuales el sujeto por así decir, se entrega, ¿no? Confiando de alguna manera. En este caso, me parece que pueda funcionar, pero generalmente él entiende, por lo que he visto, tige como tige metafeu, acompañada por el Dios en estos casos. Esto es lo que veo. Luego, si a este orden le tiene que dar un nombre, le da este de Heimarmene, probablemente, ¿no? Que es el aspecto más, es el cosmos jurídicamente ordenado, parecería. No sé tú qué piensas sobre esto. ¿Te parece que tenga sentido?
Sí, no, me parece perfecto, sí, vale. No, te agradezco.
No, gracias a ti.
¿Alguna intervención más? Some question? Mientras bien surge alguna cuestión más, yo te quería preguntar, Pietro, si el sentido también, esa clasificación de los sentidos de Tige que tú nos presentaste, en el caso de las expresiones fijas como catatigen, ¿qué tanto en esos casos se puede percibir una diferenciación? O si en esos casos más bien es el sintagma ya coloquialmente establecido, digamos, el idiomatismo que no tiene matices o no los transmite con claridad.
No estoy seguro 100%, pero me parece que efectivamente haya como, como decías, ¿no? A veces no tenga un significado particular, sino sea una especie de automatismo. Pero en algunos casos que he mencionado aquí, al revés, indica, Theia Moira indica este aspecto más tige acompañada con el Dios, básicamente. Pero en otros casos, efectivamente, no me parece tener esta connotación. Es muy inestable semánticamente este término. Es de verdad, por lo menos, me parece una especie de todo tan fluido, ¿no? No sé, no pude, por supuesto, dar esta idea porque me enfoqué sobre todo sobre este cuarto aspecto, pero hay de verdad varios otros que son muy importantes. Estas, pero es sin duda una tendencia bastante acentuada. A lo mejor antes dije sistemática, un poco excesivo, pero es bastante acentuada.
Uh-huh. Y no sé si no logré captar en la abundancia de ejemplos que nos presentaste, alguno en el que tuviera el sentido de azar o casualidad, no sé.
No, creo, déjame ver, aquí no, como azar en los casos que presenté, no, porque esto del timeo, los daimoníos, septinos, tiques, no, kata, tigen, getina. No, en estos últimos casos de los tige en los logoi, no. En los casos anteriores, tampoco. Pero Omar, son de verdad, son tantas ocurrencias como 120 o 130. Sí. Puede ser que haya mucho que todavía no he revisado, porque no estoy a un nivel todavía bastante avanzado en esta búsqueda.
Sí, porque sería interesante ver, ¿no? El uso que confrontar con el uso que después se ve en Aristóteles, ¿no?
Sí,
los pasajes, ¿no?
El sentido de Aristóteles efectivamente no lo encuentro mucho aquí.
Sí, muy interesante. Hay una pregunta más de Jorge de la Torre, por favor.
Jorge, hola.
Sí, bueno, hay un pasaje que refiere a lo mejor es muy básico el ejemplo, pero en esta idea del destino humano, de qué tanto está escrito el destino humano, hay un pasaje en donde aparecen las moiras, ¿no? La quesis, cloto, y se hace referencia, ¿no? Se hace referencia a si el ser humano está sujeto al capricho de los dioses o al destino o a una voluntad divina, ¿no? Y bueno, ahí parece que la posición de Platón es pues que en realidad el ser humano no está sujeto a este destino, ¿no? Es decir, el ser humano, digamos, estaría, si mal no recuerdo, digamos, estaría en plena posesión de su libertad para, digamos, emprender cualquier acción, de tal manera que los dioses serían inocentes, los dioses no serían culpables de toda actividad que el hombre pueda llegar a realizar, ¿no? Entonces, me parece que es un pasaje bastante interesante en cuanto al tema, ¿no?, que estás planteando, Pietro. Y bueno, no sé si tengas presente ese pasaje y qué pienses de ello en relación a esto que nos has expuesto. Es todo, gracias.
En relación a este pasaje, gracias Jorge, es un pasaje importantísimo, es uno de los pocos pasajes en la filosofía griega que yo conozco, por lo menos que haya leído hasta Platón, donde se afirma, pero a lo mejor interpreto mal yo, esta libertad absoluta, por así decir, del alma en decidir algo, podríamos decir, y los dioses no son para nada responsables en este caso. Y es, curiosamente, proyectada en el más allá, entonces en un contexto donde, porque al revés, aquí parece ser todo determinado, ¿no? Entonces hay este aspecto que no sabría, ahí estos pasajes ¿cómo se dice? De la República, del libro 10 de la República, es un pasaje que atrae mi atención por las suertes que las almas tienen que recoger. Entonces ahí, como este tipo de elección. Entonces ahí hay un elemento de quizás, Omar, como tú dices, de casualidad, ¿no? De puro azar. Entonces ahí sí, en estas suertes que están echadas, ¿no? Entonces tienen que... Entonces, esto es el aspecto sobre Tige que más me interesa en este pasaje. Pero hay, por supuesto, este aspecto de la libertad que para mí es bastante, es muy difícil de interpretar, porque efectivamente en este pasaje quita a los dioses, a la divinidad, cualquier tipo aparentemente de influencia sobre el destino del hombre. Entonces ahí el hombre se encuentra cargado, el alma se encuentra cargada de esta terrible tarea de llevar todo el peso de la decisión sobre sí. Luego cuando describe cómo las almas escogen, están condicionadas por la vida pasada, pero en este momento sugiere que no haya ningún tipo efectivamente de limitación. Y esto es muy interesante, efectivamente.
Bien, pues muchas gracias por la presentación, por las preguntas, las intervenciones. Y es tiempo de pasar a la siguiente, a la tercera presentación de esta jornada. Y corresponde ahora el turno al colega Fabián Mie, investigador del CONICET en Argentina, profesor de Filosofía Antigua en la Universidad Nacional del Litoral, y quien trabaja actualmente sobre ilemorfismo aristotélico y aspectos de la teoría de la ciencia en los segundos analíticos, y quien ha publicado libros y artículos sobre diversos aspectos del pensamiento de Platón y Aristóteles, y si mal no recuerdo, que también ha tenido un papel destacado en la Asociación Latinoamericana de Filosofía Antigua, ¿no? Que fue presidente, ¿no? Hace un par de periodos, si no recuerdo mal. Entonces, bienvenido, colega Fabián Mie, que tienes la palabra, por favor.
Muchas gracias, Omar. Si me permitís llamarte por tu nombre de pila, quisiera agradecer mucho a los organizadores, a Pietro Montanari, a quien previamente no conocía, aunque sea a la distancia. A mí también, como a Gabriele, me hubiera encantado estar con ustedes personalmente en Guadalajara, y espero que, bueno, que las cosas se den para que, además de no tener pandemia, tengamos fondos suficientes como para poder desplazarnos, al menos razonablemente, como parecería que estos encuentros lo son, ¿no es cierto? Bueno, para no dilatar más esto, la jornada de hoy ha sido larga porque ha comenzado a la mañana. Bueno, todos los días son largos. Y si yo tuviera que decirlo en inglés, voy a decir algo así como I am going to bore you with Aristotle now. Y entonces, ya que va a suceder, bueno, puesto que no tengo nada mejor que ofrecer durante unos 40 minutos eso, no sé si ustedes prefieren, los pregunto nada más, hacer 2 minutos de descanso o directamente yo continúo. Si yo debo continuar, pido que se me permita, no sé si usted, Omar, es el host aquí, presentar el texto y yo lo voy a ir pasando directamente.
Sí,
Ok.
Claro que sí.
Ok, si les parece bien, just a moment to organize my screen now. Okay. I will read the text in English. My presentation is about the posterior analytics, and it is about a very controversial and difficult, arid, hard topic, which is demonstration, definition, and particularly definition by division in some of the first chapters of the second book of the posterior analytics. It is not absolutely necessary to have the handout before you. I will read just some of the texts included originally in the handout, and I decided, as a sort of last-minute decision, to present at the end of my presentation of today, namely a topic which was not originally included in the handout, and which deals not with the last part of Posterior Analytics 2.13, but with a sort of presentation of what I think is the use of division in the theory of science in Aristotle's theory of science. Do you want to tell me something, Pietro? I see your face worried about something, or is okay? You are mute.
I just put the handout in the chat so that
perfect. But as I said, it is not absolutely necessary, and I will at least read the text. And if you want to come back to some of them, of course, we can do it in the discussion. Well, let's go to the preliminaries. In the Analytics, Aristotle presents a hard criticism against the current method of division. He mainly aims at showing that division is neither a deduction nor a demonstration, and that, as it stands, it cannot succeed in providing definitions. Now, I skip, of course, the mentions or quotations of texts, as in that case. Now, Aristotle generally takes definitions to feature in demonstration as the explanatory middle, and thus he holds that definitions are the very principles through which all sciences come about. But he has serious concerns about the divisional definition. For instance, he objects, as it is well known, that division is a weak deduction, in that it begs the question by always deducing something higher or more general than what must be demonstrated, and that it includes in the premises what should be deduced. These are sort of formal faults, isn't it? The closing passage at the end of Analytics and Posterior Analytics 2.7 summarizes the rather negative results achieved through the diaporematic examination of division and definition in the previous chapters 2, 3 to 7. And it reads in T1. From these considerations, it appears that definitions and deductions are not the same, and that there cannot be deductions and definitions of the same thing. And further, that definitions neither demonstrate nor prove anything, and that it is not possible to know what something is, either by a definition or by a demonstration. Since this involves a severe criticism of division, scholars have often been struck that in 2.13, Aristotle seems to embrace division wholeheartedly, and after making some formal positions on the divisional procedure, as well as introducing several important reformations on it in view of making division useful for demonstration, or so I will argue, Aristotle does not hesitate to recommend division as the appropriate method for grasping the essence of species. My aims here are, in general, first to clarify Aristotle's distinction between the division, deduction, and demonstration in 2.7. Second, I aim to show how Aristotle thinks that division turns out to be an integral part of causal inquiry and explanation in 2.13.14. That will be my two last sections. And a crucial issue for this project is to explain how does the account of essence reached by means of division relate to the role granted to definition as the main demonstrative principle in demonstrations. On this latter issue, Aristotle's former reformations of division will prove to be crucial. My claim will be that divisional definitions provide only a preliminary and partial account of the essence of subject kinds, which must be placed in the pre-demonstrative framework stage of science. However, doing a division well is decisive for the aims of causal inquiry, since the scientist aims at discovering which of the parts and features of a species' essence already singled out in a division can play the role of, so to say, explanantia. Thus, the formal amendments of division carefully introduced by Aristotle are intended to put to use the definitions grasped by that method as explanatory principles in working out next the demonstrations of attributes that are ultimately linked to the essence of the species. Let me move now to the second section, distinguishing definition and demonstration. Let me start off by briefly recalling the framework within which Aristotle places his discussion on definition in APO 2. At the outset of APO 2.1, Aristotle introduces the two types of entities that are concerned in the four items we seek in inquiry. They are attributes and namely P and subject kinds S. Now, while the inquiry about P6, whether it is and then why it is, the inquiry that is very basic, of course, the inquiry about S6, if it is and then what it is. This is further clarified by Aristotle's example in 2.2. On the one hand, the inquiry is partial when it is about whether the moon is eclipsed or waxing. The middle term of a demonstration provides the cause of the moon eclipsed, and the search is about whether there is a middle and what it is. For instance, as screening in this case. Therefore, since what P entities are is determined by means of why P holds of S, Aristotle claims that to know what they are is the same as to know why they are. On the other hand, the inquiry is simpliciter, not epimeros, as before, when it is about S entities, like moon or triangle. This divide of inquiry is carried out for P entities later on in 2.8, a chapter in which Aristotle suggests that grasping what such complex entities, called now demonstrable attributes, are, crucially involves demonstrations. Now this leaves us with the question about how the inquiry about the other kind of entity, namely subject kinds or species, must proceed, and particularly about which the parallel appropriate way of grasping if and what a subject kind is could be, as well as how the definition of S items can be framed. This is precisely the issue that Aristotle seems to point out in 2.3. In fact, after having recalled that whatever is sought, it is a search for a middle term, he proceeds immediately to contrast demonstration and definition. This suggests that Aristotle envisages, here some sort of definition that is of entities whose essences are known through a method different from demonstration. My claim is that this is where division takes place in this theory. Let me quote now the passage with the program drawn in 2.3, to which Aristotle often refers back in the next chapters, and in a way organizes the following chapters. The text is as follows: let us now say how we can prove what something is, and in what way we can effect a reduction. That is very complicated, what a reduction there is, but I will not discuss that point, at least today. And third, what definitions are, and fourth, what they are of. So, well, now in 90b1, following lines, Aristotle starts discussing some difficulties that seem to arise from having wrongly taken definition as being close to demonstration and deduction, probably a fault for which he blamed the Platonists. This is a confusion for which he probably blames here the Platonist practice of division, as he has already done with the practitioners of division in prior Analytics 1.13. However, a main interpretive problem is that Aristotle is not clear enough from the start about which kind of definitions he will take into account when he contrasts such an account with demonstration. As part of his diaporematic strategy in 2, 3, 4, chapter 3 to 4, he is content with merely contrasting definition and demonstration generally, and only after having briefly presented some key rules intended to amend division in 2.5, in that passage of 2.5, he makes it explicit that it is a definition by division. So he is contrasting definition by division to demonstration, what he is chiefly thinking of here. So let us read now 3. Nevertheless, that is from chapter 5. Nevertheless, there is no deduction here. Rather, the procedure lets us get to know what the thing is in some other way, if at all. If you state, the definition on the basis of the division, you do not give a deduction. For deduction, we have always, if I am not wrong, syllogismos, and for definition, mostly horismos or horos, sometimes logos, which I prefer to translate as account constantly, but the vocabulary is quite stable here, so to say. It's not like in the case of Tücher, namely per fortuna. Aristotle is content here with claiming that division cannot be allocated the logic of strict deduction at the goals of demonstration. This has a direct impact on the rather negative outcome achieved at the end of 2.7, which is a central part of Aristotle's diaporematic argument and consists in examining puzzles we remain stuck in if we do not make a neat distinction between the procedures, objects, and goals, which belong to division, deduction, and demonstration, respectively. So a main result of Aristotle's discussion in 2, 4, 6, within the diaporematic chapters, is that the inquirer cannot define subject kinds or species by means of a demonstrative procedure, which is through the middle term always. Aristotle seems to have thought that some practitioners of division at this time were not clear enough about these different objects, subject kinds, and demonstrable attributes, and the distinct procedures to properly grasp them. Let me now present a very brief overview of some points of the argument in 2.3.7. And I must say, for the time's sake, namely, I have shortened a lot this section, which is not my main point. These are very complicated chapters, very interesting in themselves, but it will take me too far to pay attention properly to them now. Therefore, I am content here just with, presenting or stressing how Aristotle contrasts properly definition to deduction and demonstration. Of course, an important discussion is about the meaning of syllogismos, if it is always apodeixis, namely, if it always leads to a demonstration, or if there is a sort of syllogismos, namely deduction, which can be granted to the proper procedure of deduction. My sense is that Aristotle tends to say no. Syllogismos and apodeixis are on the one hand, and the divisional definition, the definition by division, is on the other. Well, and their own procedures are correspondingly also different. Well, let me present this brief overview. In 2.3, Aristotle examines first whether we can know the same thing and in the same respect, both by definition and by demonstration. And this is impossible. He relies on some well-known thesis to claim that definition is of what it is or of the essence. I think, generally speaking, these theses are stated not only by Plato in some of his late dialogues, but by Aristotle himself in the topics. His claims about the contrast between definition and demonstration in 2.3 may be summarized as follows. Well, unlike demonstration, there is no definition corresponding to negative or particular sentences. These are always, all of them are in a way points of contrast between demonstration, deduction, and definition. Second, what is demonstrable is known by having a demonstration. So what is, demonstrable is not the same as what is definable. What is known in a definition is an essence, whereas what we get to know as something holding in itself or incidentally cannot be an essence. Essences are grasped in definitional sentences with a proper sentential structure. 5, namely the definition that is here contrasted with demonstration is done by means of genus and differentiae. And finally, while the demonstration proves that P holds of S, the definition shows what something is. I think that dedeictai and deloi in this passage are quite important and technical terms used by Aristotle. In view of the last 2 points of the program drawn in 2.3, which we have read before, which focus on definition, Aristotle concludes that there is no demonstration of anything of which there is a definition. So clear cut between definition and demonstration. Now, in 2.8, Aristotle makes a first step toward distinguishing the different objects of definition, and there are possibly different ways to define each of them. In 2.8, he picks up the main claim of 2.2, that knowing what something is and knowing the cause of whether it is are the same. He then goes on to introduce the 2 different things about which it seems possible to ask for the cause. Thus, in 93a5.6, he argues that the cause is the account of the fact that something is, and that the cause is either the same as the thing explained, or different from it. In the second case, when the thing is different, the cause is different from the subject, so to say, as in the case of Earth, screening, and Moon, Aristotle adds that the cause is either indemonstrable, perhaps because it is a first principle, or demonstrable, perhaps because even if it is a cause and a principle of demonstration, it is part of a broader demonstration, and therefore it can itself can be proved. Well, the important point is that for some entities, subject kinds or species, as I suggest, what gives the explanation or cause cannot be something else, and therefore they do not admit of a cause in the regular sense which this term acquires when it is used for demonstrable attributes. A main result of 2.8 is that the proper way of grasping what demonstrable attributes are involves necessary demonstration, although their counter essence as such may not be that of which the demonstration is, but rather that which is revealed by means of a demonstration. This is a very difficult part of the section of the chapter. I don't need to discuss it right now, but I refer there to, I think, to David Bronstein's interpretation on that, which I found persuasive. Well, on the other hand, regarded subject kinds, the second kind of entities involved here, not demonstrable attributes, but subject kinds or species, the point made by Aristotle in 2.8 could amount to making room for an account which follows a pattern different from explaining that some attribute belongs to a subject because of a different cause, precisely because they do not have a different cause. Which such pattern will be considered only later, as I suggest in 2.13. Let me now move to the positive story or side of my story, namely what I call the rehabilitation of division, David Baum and his followers has or have spoken of in similar terms, and I accept in many aspects the way in which they see in a way Aristotle improvements or Aristotle's critical considerations, but I focus now on 213, which is in a way a long and difficult chapter, and it is to me crucial for understanding well, which are first Aristotle's own proposals on division, on how to do a division, and second, for what is a division considered here. Well, let me start off discussing now 213 with an overview of the main passages on divisional definition. At the beginning of the chapter, this is very introductory. At the beginning of the chapter, I skipped the mentions. Aristotle introduces the main task of divisional definition, i.e. that of looking for the terms predicated in what it is. Then in 96a, he first presents the guidelines to amend division. And in a following text, he goes on to clarify the two main ingredients of any division, genus and differentia. That is very well known from the topics, namely topics 6 has a lot of material about that. Later in 96b, Aristotle makes an important, though brief, not too much, brief remark about the relationship of definition to demonstration. In 96b 35 to 97a6, he establishes two important rules that govern a well-formed division: order and exhaustiveness. And so he explains that the ultimate differentia can provide a full grasp of the essence of a species. After that, Aristotle expands on the rules of amended division, which he has presented before and already advanced into 5. This includes a reply. This is the section I will skip today, which is probably a discussion concerning, perhaps motivated by position held by Speusippus. Well, as mentioned, the main problem raised in 213 is about hunting, that is the vocabulary there, the terms predicated in what it is. Therewen and so these are the terms there. It may be argued that the rule setting for making a division, mainly grasping the genus first, dividing by order and exhaustively until reaching the first complete set of properties, which must be extensive with the species, aims to ensure that the terms are all and only those which are parts of the essence. Aristotle underlines a crucial point. The first set of genus and differentiae, which gives the complete definition, must be coextensive with the species, coextensive and almost the same. Well, thus, although each differentia is a necessary part of the definitions, the definer will find it hard to single out a species by means of a single differentia. In this regard, Aristotle justifies that what makes some set of genus and differentiae until the ultimate differentiae, like what you have there, G, D1, D2, to the ultimate differentia, sufficient as the true definitions of the essence of a species. And there we have our text 11. We should take items of this type up to the point at which we have first taken just so many that, while each extends farther, all of them together do not extend farther, coextension. This must be the essence of the object. This sounds very positive, isn't it? Okay, therefore, since only such a whole set of predicates provides the essence, as he will argue next, it makes sense that later in 96b 35, in a crucial passage which I will a little bit discuss today, Aristotle stresses that nothing should be omitted in the definitions. Okay, Now it is crucial for understanding Aristotle's primary interest in the explanatory role of definition that already when he describes the divisional definition, he makes it plain that the definition of simple entities, probably they are the species, are demonstrative principles. Since, as he says, divisions made according to the differences, this is Barnes' translation, are useful in this pursuit. In brief, division and this pursuit is, of course, demonstration. In brief, division is useful for deducing what something is, and thus it is the appropriate method to find out the definition of a species, which in turn will be of use as a demonstrative principle. This is the important point about divisional definition and demonstration, which Aristotle makes in the following difficult chapter. And let me read now the text of 96b 15:25, and it will deserve to discuss it in depth. When you are dealing with some whole, you should divide the genus into the primary indivisible species, namely number into triplet and pair. Then you should try to get definitions of these items, for instance, of straight line, circle, right angle. After this, having got what the genus is, for instance, whether it is a quantity or a quality, you should study its proper attributes through the common primaries. For the attributes of the items composed from the indivisibles will be plain from the definitions of the indivisibles, I add. Because the definition is okay with the internet, sorry?
I don't know if there is a problem on your side. No, I'm not sure.
I'm feeling very well.
It is on me, it is on me. I can read it, I can read the text again, sorry.
Okay.
If it is not problem. So I read again the text number 12. When you are dealing with some whole, you should divide the genus into the primary indivisible species, namely number into triple and pair. Then you should try to get definitions of these items. For instance, of straight line, circle, right angle. These are other examples. After this, having got what the genus is, whether it is a quantity or a quality, categories, you should study its proper attributes through the common primaries. For the attributes of the items composed from the indivisibles will be plain from the definitions of the indivisibles. Because the definition and the simple are a principle of everything, and the attributes belonging themselves to the simples alone and through them to others. Well, this passage may be considered in two sections, namely 15:21, 21:25. In the first one, we find three steps. Divide the whole genus, for instance, number, until reaching the first indivisible species. Second, take the definitions of the first indivisible species, straight line, circle, right angle, by collecting all the differentiae. Third, then, having taken the definition by the differentiae, determine the categorical type of the genus, which helps the inquirer study the proper attributes, both of the genus and of its subordinate species. In our second piece of text, from 22:25 to 25, Aristotle's main point is that per se attributes are made plain, explained, or I suppose it means explained here, through the definition of the species, i.e. the atomic entities or simples. So some attributes, for instance, having two rights, a well-known example by Aristotle from the first book, are shown to belong to what triangle is. Suppose triangle is definition as presented there. Now, the general point I would like to stress here about the importance of getting a full divisional definition is just that, for providing an explanation of attributes, of demonstrable attributes, it is crucial to collect all the terms predicated in what it is. Otherwise, relevant demonstrable attributes may be left unexplained because they cannot be causally linked to one or the other part of the essence. As suggested, precisely that explanatory power is what justifies ultimately Aristotle's amended method of division as presented clearly in the following passage. And I read the passage which follows exactly the previous one. Okay, again, only in this way it is possible to ensure that you omit nothing in what it is, for when the first kind has been taken, you then take one of the lower division, not everything will fall into it. It is clear in the example, or more clear in the example. Not everything is either whole winged or split winged. Rather, every winged animal is. I skip the parentheses. Third, the first difference of animal is that into which every animal falls, and similarly for everything else, both the kinds outside it and the kinds subordinate to it. And fourth, if you continue in this way, you can know that nothing has been omitted, so exhaustiveness. Otherwise, you are bound to omit something without knowing that you have omitted it, of course. These are rules very well known from the topics where, however, are used for, as in Aristotelian dialectic, a different purpose. Well, the main rule in 1 and 4 consists in avoiding to omit some predicate in what it is. To follow that rule, the divider must always take the first genus. This is the first step which allows us to locate the species under its genus as mentioned in 2.8, and do the same to downwards so that she has the genus exhaustively divided. Perhaps in the discussion section, I can comment about the importance I assign to this first step, namely the step in which you place the thing you are trying to define under the right genus, in reference to this passage of 2.8. Otherwise, as made explicit in 2 and 3, previous section, not every genus immediate higher kind exhausted by some division at a lower level is used as a test for revealing the first differentia of that higher kind. For instance, since whole-winged and split-winged, two opposite differentia located at the same level of the differentiation do not exhaust the genus animal, it is likely to assume that if we construe the definitions by means of animal whole-winged, we will be omitting the upper level of winged animal, with the result that we will get a discontinuous division with an incomplete set of essential predicates. As implied in 21-25, Aristotle seems to be worried about this fault, since in a discontinuous division, the divider does not get the true definition of the species, and as a consequence, she will not be able to grasp the explanatory principle. Summing up, exhaustive division aims to establish all the differential levels until reaching the last one, and thereby the proper atomic item, the ultimate differentia, which corresponds to the species, or that we present as with the species. And it aims to make it orderly by locating every single differentia at the immediately lower level, dn+1. So a correct division that provides us with the definitions of a species must take the form that we get there: genus, differentia in an order series, continuous, and until the last differentia. I am coming now to my final remarks, where I tried briefly to show the importance of all of this discussion for Aristotle's own goals in the analytic, which is first of all first principles and demonstration. Revisions are reorganizations of the other set of differentiae included in the set we have read before, cannot be ruled out once the scientist is engaged in the job for the sake of which she makes division, namely the explanation of attributes that ultimately rely upon the essence of the species and covered by the divisional set, genus, until ultimate differentia. Actually, the proper way to get full knowledge of the essence of a species is to know it as a demonstrative principle. This means that once the divider has made a division, she checks it as to its explanatory power. In view of the argumentative structure of A power 2, this means that once Aristotle has disentangled division, deduction, and demonstration in the diaphragmatic chapters, and he has established that there can be definitions of complex, or namely demonstrable attributes, as well as of simple, namely of species, essences. So two types of definitions in a way. He can turn in 213 and 214 to show that division and demonstration are two distinct but intertwined procedures in scientific inquiry. We must distinguish here two stages. This is the way in which I take now the suggestion made by Michael Fercher. In the first stage, the inquirer initially places the species under a genus, thus grasping the more general feature of its what it is. Then she starts dividing continuously and eventually comes to the ultimate differentia, grasping the essence in a divisional definition. Since this essence explains what the species is, this shows how the two questions raised in inquiry are related for species, namely to know what the species is amounts to knowing why the species is the kind of thing it is. In the second stage, first stage, second stage, the divisional definition is put at the service of explanation when it comes to consider why a per se or demonstrable attribute belongs to some subject. As far as they are demonstrable, all such attributes must be explanatorily taken back to the essence of, for the definition by genus and differentia turns out to be integrated into the proper task of demonstration, which is to prove that some attributes are causally linked by means of one or more of our causes, by means of one or more of the four causes, to the subject kind. So the link is a causal link by means of the four causes from the attributes to the subject kind or species. Now, as a rule, demonstrable attributes must be causally taken back ultimately to the essence of the subject, since in the eclipse example, for instance, being deprived of light, the major term A, is explainable by a fact related ultimately to the essence of moon, minor term C, since the moonlight can be lost when the earth blocks the sun's natural light. This is the middle term. Keeping this double stage framework in mind, one may say that division is sufficient for grasping the essence and definition of a species. Following the rules, the division can discover an essence and provides its definition, but still, demonstration remains the only adequate setup within which the definition grasped by division is known to be a genuine demonstrative principle. Thus, when a demonstration that A belongs to C is made, the definition used as a middle term B is put to the test as to whether it offers the essence that can be expanded into a causal definition, which provides the demonstrative principles that can explain why does A belong to C. I think for the time's sake, I can skip now the example with horned animals in 214, where Aristotle properly sets this machinery at the service of demonstration. Let me now just close with this short part. In this interpretation, I have argued that divisional definition can be turned into a principle of demonstration by carefully looking for the explanatory connections between the terms already obtained by division, Some do the explaining, while others must be explained, and working out the demonstrations. This is also what Aristotle envisages in this short but very clear sentence. It is plain that we shall now be in a position to state the reason why whatever follows, the items falling under the common kinds, holds of them. Division is included there, and the important point is that we can state the reason, namely the cause, by doing the division. This justifies Aristotle's rules setting on divisional definition in 213, since the main task of division is to select the common kind first, and then what follows this. This is justified because by resorting to the relevantly higher level of generality, for instance, being an animal, having horns, or some other common basic feature, place it at the corresponding level in a division. The inquirer, on the basis of this, the inquirer can explain certain per se properties of the animal's way of life and animal's functional parts as being causally dependent on the animal's essence. Okay, thank you very much for your attention, and sorry for having taken a little more time than I expected.
Thank you very much to the colleague Fabian Mier for his wonderful exposition. And now we have some time for questions or discussion in general. There is a question by María Teresa Padilla, por favor.
Gracias, Fabián. Buenas tardes. Bastante complejo, muchas veces tu texto, pero muy interesante. A ver, yo te quería preguntar si tú has detectado qué diferencias hay. Bueno, sí puedo preguntar en español, ¿verdad? Supongo. Estamos creo que mayoría hispanohablantes, ¿verdad?
Sí, yo creo que es válido. Sí, cualquier lengua que se decida, sí.
Bueno, ¿cuál sería la diferencia fundamental que tú verías entre el proceso de la sinagogue y de la diáresis en Platón y lo que tú nos presentas aquí en Aristóteles, sobre todo que vas haciendo como un desglose de lo que implica captar la esencia en una definición hecha a base de la división? Y porque tú das dos aspectos importantes, hablar de la definición como demostración y como una especie de explicación causal, y al final sintetizaste, así como si, dime si lo capté bien, una vez que llegas a esta definición que puede ser a base de la división, puede ligar directamente con un principio de demostración, una vez que tú puedes observar cuáles son las conexiones explicativas con base en un rasgo común que nos llegue a, valga mi redundancia, a captar la esencia de cada cosa. Es decir, y en el caso de Platón, es decir, el proceso de división tiene que ser precedido por la recolección, por la sinagogue, hasta llegar a una división, algo que no pueda ser divisible, cuando menos hasta el momento. Es decir, pero no tiene así como una finalidad eminentemente demostrativa. Y aquí en Aristóteles tú estás diciendo que sí. Entonces no sé si capté bien lo que estás diciendo tú aquí.
Bueno, si puedo contestar en castellano es para mí también más fácil, ya que la pregunta fue en castellano. Muchas gracias, María Teresa, un gusto grande de verla, aunque sea a la distancia. En efecto, creo que lo que usted presentó de más o menos la intención de mi propia exposición es correcto, o no tengo nada sustancial que decir, digamos así. Me parece que si se trata de encontrar en Aristóteles un elemento comparable a la sinagogue, no estoy muy seguro de que él tenga algo comparable a lo que se presenta en algunos lugares como eso, como el rol que tiene eso en Platón. En cuanto a que Aristóteles efectivamente en este texto, puesto que como dije en los tópicos, no es cierto, en tópico 6 él presenta reglas para la división que en buena medida, vamos a decir así, son una expansión, ¿no es cierto?, de algunas de las cosas que brevemente dice Platón, por ejemplo, en aquellos conocidos pasajes del Político acerca de la división, ¿no es cierto?, pero con otro rol, con otro objetivo, que son los propios de la dialéctica aristotélica en los tópicos, ¿no es cierto? Mientras que aquí está en un contexto que, claro, como traté de decir un poco rápidamente, en la parte diaporemática, en donde Aristóteles simplemente trata de mostrar lo que él cree, por supuesto, que son algunas confusiones posiblemente de los practicantes de la división de la época, y posiblemente eso no pueden ser más que los platónicos, ¿es cierto? Algunos platónicos. Pero él está entonces tratando de armar la división en el sentido casi de darle una armadura a la división, una armadura lógica a la división, ¿no es cierto?, a fin de que no se confunda con la demostración, y por lo tanto necesita, en mi concepto, distinguirla claramente de la deducción. Por eso ese pasaje importante de 2.5, que creo que en algún momento cité o leí, ¿no es cierto?, en donde él dice, de ninguna manera alguien que esté haciendo correctamente una división, en donde cita las reglas básicas de la división, está deduciendo propiamente. En fin, eso es lo que se me ocurre ahora, María Teresa, la verdad.
Entonces,
pero
lo central sería entonces que Aristóteles trataría, como acabas de decir, Fabián, de dotar de una armadura lógica al proceso de división misma y a la demostración misma.
Sí, yo creo que sí. Yo creo que sí, y si uno lee los tópicos 6 con atención, largo libro, ¿no es cierto? Y particularmente algunos libros, algunos capítulos 6.6 y 6.4, en fin, extremadamente detallados. Creo que esa intención también está presente, aun cuando con otro objetivo. Pero la intención de aclarar cómo debe funcionar una división para que nos otorgue una división, dije bien, ¿cierto? Para que nos otorgue una definición bien elaborada, me parece que está presente en esos dos textos incluso de Aristóteles, con diferente objetivo. Resalto lo de con diferente objetivo porque creo que es lo central, digamos así, ¿no? Hay paralelos, pero los objetivos son bien distintos.
Y nada más un último punto. ¿Podrían volverse términos intercambiables, definición y demostración, o solamente en algunos casos?
Ajá. Yo creo que con relación a lo que llamamos atributos demostrables, o atributos per se, ¿no es cierto? Cosas tales como el eclipse, me parece que el texto de final de 2.8 y de 2.9, él dice claramente que, bueno, la definición del eclipse no hay, puesto que es una definición propiamente demostración, aunque la esencia de eclipse no puede conocerse más que, es decir, prescindiendo de una demostración. Para conocer qué es el eclipse, yo debo hacer una demostración que me muestre que a través de la interposición de la Tierra se produce una sombra en la Luna. En cambio, en el caso de las especies, el procedimiento para conocer su esencia es la división, y eso es precisamente no una demostración, ni tampoco algo que sigue un procedimiento que, desde el punto de vista de cuál es la lógica del procedimiento, deba ser la deducción. Entre los autores antiguos hay, por supuesto, ya en Alejandro hay discusión sobre esto, particularmente por un posible pasaje en donde en los tópicos podría hacer referencia Aristóteles a una demostración del qué es. Pero yo creo que esos términos hay que tomarlos con grano salis, digamos así. Me parece que si uno habla estrictamente de demostración y deducción, como en algunos lugares lo hace Aristóteles, no hay una cosa tal. Y luego tenemos, pero no quisiera entrar en eso ahora, solamente para no ser deshonesto y no mencionarlo, que tenemos algunos textos en donde Aristóteles habla de una apodeixis del qué es y de un silogismos del qué es. Esto es en el famoso texto de 2.10, en donde sintetiza por lo menos 3 tipos de definición, ¿cierto? Pero cuando habla de eso, a mí me parece que está hablando de los atributos demostrables y no de lo que yo creo que es un lugar al final, la tercera definición, ¿no es cierto?, en 2.10, en donde sí considera especies, para cuyo caso no hay ni una cosa ni la otra, ni deducción ni demostración. Claro, uno debería especificar qué entiende por deducción aquí y por demostración, pero yo entiendo que, digamos, uno puede más o menos dar por supuesto la noción general de Aristóteles, que es con la cual él trabaja aquí, ¿no es cierto? Él tampoco lo hace, digamos, él supone que lo ha hecho ya al comienzo de los analíticos primeros y ha dicho además al comienzo de los analíticos segundos qué es una demostración y el conocimiento demostrativo, y esa es la noción básica con la cual opera, me parece, en el libro 2.
Sí, muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.
Bien, hay todavía unos pocos minutos para alguna pregunta. Jorge de la Torre, por favor.
Sí, gracias. Bueno, pues felicidades, Fabián. No sé si lo que te vaya a comentar siga la secuencia de tu argumentación. Espero que sí, pero de cualquier manera me puedes corregir, ¿no? Según alcancé a detectar el método silogístico que va a seguir Aristóteles es un método que va a determinar y a definir lo real. Entonces, hay cada predicado, cada premisa debe de ordenarse lógicamente para determinar una posible conclusión válida. Pero la cuestión está en que lo real estaría supeditado, o las cosas reales o los objetos o los animales, por ejemplo, serían finitos. O sea, hay un último predicado, una última descripción que definiría de una manera única, acabada, lo que algo es, un animal, por ejemplo, ¿no? Y con esto llegamos a su esencia, ¿no? Entonces, la pregunta sería esto, o sea, en el ámbito de definir lo real, en el ámbito de tratar de acotar con ciertos silogismos, Aristóteles estaría entrando a una definición de la finitud, o sea, el método de conocimiento es de finitud, tenemos que definir las cosas por su finitud, y esto yo lo veo que se opone a una definición de lo infinito, ¿no? Es decir, no puede haber conocimiento en lo infinito, en las proposiciones indeterminadas, no puede haber conocimiento en lo indeterminado. Todo conocimiento tendría que ser siempre determinado y llegar a una última, digamos, conclusión. Entonces, la pregunta es esta, o sea, el modelo aristotélico sería, su modelo de conocimiento de ciencia sería un conocimiento de las cosas meramente finitas.
Gracias, Jorge.
Sí.
En fin, la pregunta es amplia, yo te agradezco. Lo que me parece que yo puedo decir ahora, en un sentido también un poco amplio, es que a mí me parece que esa es una posición que en el fondo Aristóteles comparte con Platón, digamos. Digamos, la idea de Aristóteles que está, por ejemplo, en algunos pasajes de los tópicos, y también de alguna manera implicada, yo creo que lo que dicen segundos analíticos acerca de la división, en su parte positiva, es consistente, aunque menos amplia y con otros objetivos, como ya dije varias veces, que lo que dice, o con lo que dice, si digo consistente con los tópicos. Y en los tópicos dicen en algunos lugares, bueno, supongamos que alguien piense que hay distintas definiciones de algo. O bien esas definiciones son equivalentes entre sí, o alguna es rechazable, porque la esencia de cada cosa es una sola. Que nosotros tengamos distintos problemas para captar, problemas epistémicos, digamos así, para captar la esencia de algo, es una cuestión, pero la suposición, digamos así, de carácter metafísico, como quiera que se llame, de que la esencia de cada cosa es una única cosa, y que si es compleja, como evidentemente el método de la división lo supone, en el sentido de que hay un género, distintas diferencias, hasta una diferencia última, esa complejidad, sin embargo, termina en lo que yo llamé algún momento una especie de finite set, ¿no es cierto?, of properties. Es decir, un grupo, un conjunto finito de propiedades. En el fondo yo creo que eso es una regla, vamos a decir así, una reglamentación que viene del TST platónico, ¿no es cierto? Y que Aristóteles está adoptando dentro de su propia, en fin, conceptualización, en algunos casos divergente de la de Platón. ¿Se entiende la respuesta? O sea, me parece que es una deuda platónica, es una deuda de Aristóteles para con Platón, la suposición de que el tipo de conocimiento el tipo de un conocimiento robusto al que uno y otro apunta, tiene que ver con algo así como lo determinado y lo limitado. Aun cuando, y retomando un poco la presentación de Gabriele en primer término de hoy, ¿no es cierto? En algunos lugares eso, en fin, implique lidiar con lo indeterminado, pero no quiere decir, creo que consistente, digamos así, esto con que haya dos principios, o dos principios, o lo que sea, si alguien no quiere comprometerse con principios de la filosofía platónica tardía, ¿no es cierto? Pero en fin, creo que es una deuda de Platón, para con Platón en torno a la teoría de la esencia, en el fondo, ¿no es cierto? Eso sería mi respuesta.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Hemos alcanzado el punto final. Agradecemos muy cumplidamente la participación de los tres ponentes, de la asistencia y la participación también de todos los que están aquí conectados. Y pues no nos queda más que darnos cita para mañana a partir de las 10 de la mañana, ¿verdad? Es la primera sesión, Pietro.
Si logran, los que quieren estar, sobre todo nosotros 5 minutos antes. 10
Claro.
minutos, como siempre.
Exacto. Muy bien. La hora de inicio son las 10, pero la conexión se
9:50.
un poco antes, ¿verdad? Claro, 9:50. Muy bien. Pues muchas gracias a todos de nuevo, muchas felicidades. Creo que ha sido un trabajo muy productivo. Y pues con el gusto de vernos, aunque sea virtualmente, y que esperamos mañana se repita, ¿no? Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Gracias a todos.
Vale.
Y buenas
Gracias.
tardes o noches para el lugar en donde cada uno esté.
Muy bien.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Bye.
Chao, chao.
Adiós.
Hasta luego.